So we're in section 5.3. And we're talking about circumference and area of circles. So I'm going to start with quickly with a definition of a circle. We're going to talk about circles and the definition a little more later. We're going to come up with an equation for a circle. But I just want to mention this just so that we've seen it before, and I think it'll help us understand what we're talking about. So we define a circle by saying that it is the set of all points that are the same distance from a center. And the distance that we're talking about is the radius of the circle. So a little later in the semester, when we talk about the equation of a circle, and we'll have an idea of why it looks the way it does, because it has something to do with distance. And we're going to be using the distance formula. So our distance formula we'll work with some more, but I just wanted to talk about this today so that when we see it again, we'll have a little bit of understanding about what we're talking about. So let's draw a circle, and we'll label our parts. So here's our this part, the labeling and yes, that will go in your flip book. So let me get the center here. And we'll put a couple of parts in here. So the point here is the center. The blue segment is the radius, and the red segment is the diameter. And who can tell us how the radius is related to the diameter?
It's twice the yeah.
Twice, yes. So twice the radius is the diameter. So we can say that the diameter equals 2 times the radius, or D equals 2R. So the radius goes halfway across, the diameter goes all the way across. And with circles, we call the distance around the circumference rather than the perimeter. So they mean the same thing, but with circles we call it the circumference. So here is our formula for the circumference. And I'm just going to write that. The circumference equals the distance around. And the circumference equals pi d, or if we want to write it with the radius instead of the diameter, we can write 2 pi r. So this is going to be the formula that goes in your flip book. The circumference is pi d or 2 pi r, depending on whether we want to use the diameter to find our circumference or the radius to find our circumference. And our units for circumference is a length, so this is just going to be plain units. Inches, centimeters, meters, miles. We're talking about a length when we talk about circumference. And this is really the first time that we've used pi. So I want to talk about pi for a second, because pi is one of the most important numbers in math. So pi is a very special number. It comes up in a lot of different places, not just with circles. But for any circle, anywhere, no matter how big, no matter how small, if we divide the circumference by the diameter of any circle, we get the number pi. So no matter what, no matter where we are, no matter how big the circle is, we always get pi if we divide the circumference by the diameter. And pi is special also because it never repeats. It goes on and on and on. If we write it as a decimal, it goes on and on and on and on and on and never repeats. So it shows up in a lot of different places, not just with circles. It shows up in science a lot. It shows up in all kinds of different formulas where you wouldn't expect to see something that we talk about having to do with circles. It shows up in a lot of different places. It's a very important number, and I think it's really cool because it kind of gives us, I feel like it kind of gives you a little peek into how the universe is put together. Because if you divide the circumference by the diameter of a circle, you always get this particular number. Now, our problems, when we write our answers to our problems that involve circles, we have to calculate with pi, and the problems will ask you to write your answers in two different ways. It will ask you to write them as a decimal, and it'll say round to the 10th or round to the 100th. If your problem asks you to write it as a decimal, you just multiply everything together in your calculator. So if our answer says write as a decimal, write as an approximation, that just tells us we're multiplying everything together in our calculator. Sometimes the problems will tell you to leave your answer in terms of pi or give an exact answer. An exact answer means we're using pi along with all of its infinite number of decimal places. So we don't write a decimal, we just write the symbol pi. So when it tells you to write in terms of pi, or it'll also say exact, we multiply everything except pi and leave the symbol pi in our answer. And we leave the symbol in our answer. And we'll do an example that talks about what this means. So exact means we're using pi with all of its infinite number of decimal places. So our calculator can't keep track of infinite number of decimals. So we just write the symbol pi to represent that number with all of its decimal places. So let's look at an example. So we have a circle. And it has a radius of 17 inches. We want its circumference. And we want it in terms of pi. And also rounded to the 100th. So how are we going to find the circumference? What formula are we going to use? Circumference equals pi times diameter, or 2 pi r. Either one will give us the same answer. So if our radius,
Multiply 17 by 2.
okay, 2 pi r or pi d. So the diameter equals 17 times 2, which is what? 34, and that's going to be in inches. So our circumference, if we want an exact answer or if we want it in terms of pi, our circumference is going to be 34 pi inches. I just leave pi there, so it's pi times d. My diameter, d, is 34, and I'm multiplying it by pi. 34 pi inches. And if we want it rounded to the 100th, I would put that in my calculator, and I would say that the circumference is approximately, if I multiply that out, I get 106.81 inches when I round it to the 100th place. So I just want us to make sure that we understand that when the problem says exact answer or in terms of pi, we calculate, we multiply everything out except for pi and just leave the pi in the answer. That's all it's asking us to do. We just leave the symbol pi in the answer. And when we calculate, you can use 3.14 for pi, or you can use the pi number on your calculator. Either one will be fine. And if your answer is a little bit off because you did one or the other, I can recognize when that happens, and you won't get counted off for that. Any questions on circumference? Any questions about pi? All right, so let's talk about area of a circle. So the area of a circle, the formula for the area of the circle is probably one of the two most famous formulas in all of math. So the area what's the formula for the area of a circle? Pi r squared. Where r is the radius. So pi r squared and the Pythagorean Theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, probably two of the most famous formulas in math. And we get to talk about the Pythagorean Theorem tomorrow. So we'll talk about two famous formulas 2 days in a row. Same thing when we calculate area. If the problem says give an exact answer or keep your answer in terms of pi, you just multiply everything out and leave the symbol pi in your answer. If it asks you to give a decimal, then you just multiply everything in your calculator using 3.14 for pi or using your pi button and come up with a decimal. And our units for area are going to be units squared. Area is always going to be in square units. Inches squared, centimeters squared, meters squared, some kind of square unit. So let's look at a quick example of calculating area, and And that'll be our formulas for today. So here's my circle. And the center. And this is 17 centimeters. And I want the area. I want the area in terms of pi and rounded to two decimal places. So how are we going to calculate our area? Our formula is pi r squared. What's the radius of this circle? What was it? 8.5. How did we get 8.5? Divide the diameter by 2. So the radius equals 17 divided by 2. So we get 8.5 centimeters. My radius is 8.5 centimeters. And now I can put that into my formula. The area is pi times 8.5 squared. And if I square 8.5, I get 72.25 pi centimeters squared. So 8.25 is 72.25. I keep the pi in there to give my answer in terms of pi. Now rounded to 2 decimal places, I'm just going to calculate this in my calculator. And if I plug this into my calculator, I get that the area is about 226.98 centimeters squared. Any questions on area of a circle? Now, some of your homework problems are going to ask you to find, they'll give you the area, or they'll give you the circumference, and they'll want you to find the radius, or they'll want you to find the diameter. So we're going to be using these formulas to figure out different things. We're not only going to be solving for area. We might know the area and try to solve for the radius. So you're going to have to work with these formulas to figure out some of the things in your homework problem. So you need to be able to use your algebra to go from your formulas to solve for the parts that the problem asks for. We're not only going to be calculating area, we're going to be figuring other things out. Is everybody good? Okay. All right, it's homework for today. We're on page 317.